Do I have a motion for approval?
I move that we pass the minutes out from the February 2nd.
Do I have a second? Let the records reflect Representative Neighbor. Okay, thank you. Body, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Minutes are approved. So with that, let's jump on in here, and I'd like to open the hearing on House Bill 2228. First, I will call upon the reviser to provide us with an overview of what the bill does.
Good morning, committee. So committee, these two bills you are seeing today are going to be dealing with net metering and parallel generation. These methods are ways to interconnect your distributed generation solar, wind system to an electric utilities grid. There's some differences between the two methods. So parallel generation applies to all utilities in Kansas, whereas net metering only applies currently to investor-owned utilities. The credits that you can get for the energy that your distributed generation system produces are a little different under the two. We could get into those. The size limits are a little different between the two. If Mr. Chair, if you want me to kind of brief the differences a little bit and then get into the merits of the bill. Okay, so again, parallel generation is applicable to all utilities in Kansas. Any customer with a renewable generator, that's not defined in law. The size limits for these renewable generators for residential customers are 25 kilowatts of residential power. The size limits for commercial customers is 200 kilowatts under parallel generation. And then, excuse me, 1.5 megs for Cloud County Community College and Dodge City Community College. Those are the only two schools that can apply under parallel generation riders. Under parallel generation, you can only, or the utility only has to allow a 4% total capacity of the generating systems under parallel generation. So a utility's total generation capacity for these distributed generation systems is maxed out at 4% of their total capacity. You'll see a little difference in the net metering law under that total capacity. The credits that can be awarded under parallel generation for 200 kilowatt or less systems, it is 150% of essentially the utility's avoided cost of energy. So those smaller systems are getting 150% of that avoided cost. Whereas if it's over 200 kilowatts, which is only the schools, Cloud County, Dodge City Community College, they get 100% of the utility's avoided cost of energy. So under net metering, it's a little different. This, again, only applies to investor-owned utilities. It's for customers with a renewable generator, and this can include wind, solar, ag-producing crops, methane, wood products, hydropower, hydrogen fuel cells that were produced using a renewable energy method, and other renewable energy battery storage systems that also were fueled up with the renewable energy method. The size limits for net metering, you can go, and this gets a little different. Net metering has three different dates that you're dealing with. So the size limits for systems, if you have a rooftop solar system on your house and you put it on before July 1 of 2014, you could be up to 25 kilowatts for that residential system. And again, prior to July 1, 2014, operating a system, you would be up to 200 kilowatts for a commercial, industrial, school, or government or agricultural system. Now, after July 1, 2014, the law changes and says that residential customers can go up to 15 kilowatts, and then up to 100 kilowatts for religious institutions, commercial institutions, industrial, governmental, and agricultural institutions. And then it maintains, or it back down the schools a little bit too, down to 150 kilowatts for schools. The credits for net metering, again, are on that date system. So prior to July 1, 2014, you're getting credited if your system was operating before that date at a 1-to-1 ratio of your kilowatt hours. And then these credits would expire on March 31st of each year. And you would bank them through the year and get credited at that 1-to-1 ratio. And then those credits would expire March 31st every single year. After July 1st, 2014, if you installed your system, you would be credited at 100% of the utility's avoided cost. And then in the law, starting January 1st, 2030, all customers would then be kicked over, whether your system was operating prior to 2014 or not, you'd be kicked over to a 100% avoided cost ratio. So, Mr. Chairman, the first bill, House Bill 2228, this would amend the Net Metering and Easy Connection Act. And again, this is investor-owned utilities only under current law. What Section 1 of the bill would do is it would require municipal utilities and electric cooperative public utilities to be included within the net metering provisions of law. Section 2 of the bill would increase the system size capacity, and I might not have mentioned that, but under net metering, IOUs only have to allow net metered facilities up to 1% of their total system load. What this bill would do is it would increase that total net metered capacity to 10% of utilities load. So all those utilities would be subject to that 10% net metered capacity requirement. Section 3 of the bill would amend the credits that net metered customers are eligible to receive. What the bill would do is it would retain the 1-to-1 crediting for customers that started operating their systems prior to 2014. But then for customers that are operating started operating their systems after 2014, it would change that credit ratio. So instead of the 100% of utilities avoided cost, the crediting would be done on a 1-to-1 basis, reduced by 25%. Essentially, they would get 75% of that 1-to-1 basis. And then the credits would expire. The customer would be able to bank those credits. The credits would expire on March 31 of each calendar year. Section 4 of the bill would amend the statutory size limitations for net metered facilities and would prohibit a utility from imposing a cap or limiting the amount of electricity a customer may generate subject to net metering. So I talked about those size limitations for residential and industrial consumers. This would eliminate those size limitations, prohibit a utility from imposing a cap. But I will note that there would be a cap provided under House Bill 2228 that would cap net metered generation facilities up to 250 kilowatts for any net metered system. And again, under these systems we're talking about, the system has to be sized appropriately for the customer's anticipated load amount. The provision, if you look on the kind of the final pages of that bill, you'll see a method, a mathematical method to determine the customer's anticipated load amount. So when you're determining that customer's anticipated load amount, you would look back at the prior 12 months historical usage of that customer, and then do a mathematical formula to determine the anticipated load amount. Mr. Chair, I could get into that. Essentially, if you're a smaller generator, once you do that formula, if you fall between 2 kilowatts and 20 kilowatts, whatever that formula produces, you round up to the nearest 2 kilowatts, and that's your system size limit. And then if you're one of the larger ones, between 20 and 250 kilowatts, you run that mathematical formula and you round up to the nearest 5 increment to determine your system size capacity. And Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to answer any questions on House Bill 2228 or parallel generation net metering in general.
Sure. Maybe you've heard the description of the bill by the reviser. Do you have any questions? I see none. So with that, let's move on to the proponents. And before the first one comes up, because I'm showing we've got 15 individuals who are wanting to testify here, we're going to have to limit the testimonies. I'm looking at 2 minutes apiece in order to fit these in. If you want to talk amongst yourselves to figure out if I've got a certain person to go up to speak for a group, I will allow them accordingly the additional time. So with that, we're going to start with the proponents. Jessica Lucas with Clean Energy Business Council.
Good morning, committee. Jessica Lucas with the Clean Energy Business Council. Energized to be in front of you today. For too long, we've been talking about the need to lower electric rates in Kansas and make them more regionally competitive. Before you today, House Bill 2228 is a tool that will provide rate-saving options for your constituents. This is a place where we come because there are problems to solve. And what you're going to hear from conferees today are the problems that they're having in the marketplace for folks who want to be able to install solar. The bill has essentially one opponent, the utilities, a fact of which we do not get to choose our utility provider. Much like when you move somewhere, you get to decide if you want AT&T or Cox, you don't have a choice of your utility provider. But where you do have choice to manage your bill is one, an energy efficiency option. So some folks, when I was growing up, the only energy savings tool we had was the reminder from our dad to turn out the light, turn out the light, turn out the light. Today, we have a lot of tools. We have programmable thermostats, HVAC systems, better windows, better insulation. You have a host of items that you can invest in that will lower your bill. There is no penalty for doing so. Unfortunately, for men and women choosing to install solar, there are penalties. In some instances, there are places that require you to pay a $912 application fee just to get permission from the utility to put solar on your home. Some folks install and then find out a couple months in that they've changed the rules, and now they're going to have to pay a revenue recovery fee. So House Bill 2028 seeks to provide uniformity among the states so that everyone, no matter where they're at, is playing by the same rules and knows and understands what they can do regarding solar generation. It also changes the size restrictions. We have some of the most restrictive size restrictions in the state of Kansas compared to our counterparts, including those just around us. And they have lower rates. And as you're going to hear, this is going to blow up the system. And I'm sure there's going to be all kinds of fear mongering. But the reality is many people...
We need to move to the next one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is not uncommon what we're asking. It's successfully working in other states. And we appreciate your support as we move forward on this.
Next up is Mark Horst with King Solar.
My name is Mark Horst. I wanted to thank you guys for taking the time to hear us out and take a pragmatic approach to the grid stability here in our state. A couple goals for my conversation with you today is one is to give stable and equitable design criteria, which Jessica talked quite a bit about. We also want stable and equitable compensation for the energy that goes bi-directionally back and forth from the utility. And equal access to all Kansans is really kind of the core of this bill. About 40 years ago, it was the first or the oldest grid-tied solar array in the world is only 40 years old. And so our industry is very young. The legislation here in Kansas was first passed in 2009, and there have been some updates over time, but it's time for us to mature as a utility and for us to find ways to integrate all this proven technology. Because back in 2009, when the bill was originally passed, there are lots of questions saying, like, is it possible to have bidirectional flow of energy? Well, the answer today is yes. Is the equipment safe and effective? Yes. Can the grid and the utility provide power to everyone when some consumers are giving power back to them? The answer is yes. There's a couple things that I want to touch on. Most utilities do not provide their own energy. They don't produce their own energy. They buy from a generation and transmission provider. And they're beholden, or at least they say they're beholden, to a one-way flow of energy from the generation source to the utility, from the utility to the consumer. The net metering and parallel generation have allowed between the consumer and the utility to be bidirectional. However, the utilities are saying we cannot make that same agreement with our G&Ts. This bill would basically say you have to take energy, and you have to figure it out with your G&T to be able to allow more, because the Jensen family is a good example. They're in rural McPherson County. We had a contract with them last year to put in a system that would save them about $130 every month. They're heading into their retirement years, trying to levelize their expenses. We went through the application process, and the utility, it was a rural cooperative, said, nope, our substation certain times of the year can't handle that, because we might push it back.
Need to cut you off then.
Okay.
Thank you for.
Well, I appreciate it. We'd like to see equitable access for Kansans. Thanks.
Next up is Michelle Milburn from Stanton Electric. Welcome to the committee.
Mr. Chairman, committee members, thank you. As we know, the aggregate capacity cap of 1%, we are approaching that quickly. In addition, the expiration of the net metering policy is in 2030. Warranties on solar are 25 years. When the initial act in 2009 was created, and those 25-year warranties were in place, a homeowner or business owner would have had to have installed that system in 2005 to see that 25-year warranty period through the end of 2030 when it expired. So imagine somebody who's trying to make that decision today for a 25-year warranty period when they only have 7-point-something years before it expires. That really creates a lot of insecurity within the market. In 2014, legislative action prevented revenue erosion for utilities. That was a big focus by the claim that it was a threat to those utilities. In 2018, the Kansas Corporation Commission approved an Evergy residential demand rate that later was determined to be discriminatory by the Kansas Supreme Court, and they invalidated that demand rate. In the 2 years between 2018, when that rate was made, and 2020, when the court decision overturned it, rural cooperatives and municipal utilities created their own revenue recovery measures. Those took many forms. That includes revenue recovery charges, grid access fees, reductions not reductions in avoided cost, my apologies, but growing fees for applications.
Okay, I need to cut you off. Sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming, though. I do appreciate it. Next up is Eric Stafford from the Kansas Chamber. Do not see Eric Stafford. And we will move on to Andrew Clark, AC Custom Solar. Welcome to the committee.
I've got the privilege of talking today. I've been in renewable energy since 2008. I went through the Cloud County Community College program, and then I ended up starting my own business. I'm now doing that full time. We have so many different cooperatives and municipals that we work with every day. I've installed over 100 projects in the last 6-7 years, and we're trying to shuffle all the different policies. This one does this, so I have to make sure I get all my financial calculations correct, because there's so many different policies, and this one charges $500, this one charges $250. We'd like some stability, some a standard policy, and this would definitely do that. Also, there's some cities that have such a high rate in order to install solar that it makes it literally never pencil out. The payback would be over 25 years, and that's with it's just a straight grid tied system. A lot of my customers are now installing batteries in order to keep instead of a generator, having a battery as a standby, and it's completely affordable. If the grids would get in on this, they could use that battery when times makes most sense, and like California and some of those other states are doing, where they actually have it actually benefits the grid, but we can't do that, and it's not even really affordable to do that unless you have some kind of critical need for power, freezers and that kind of stuff. And then also there's places like actually in my home in the city of Beloit, we have a policy that charges you $2.50 for every kilowatt of installed capacity. And actually that was after I talked them down from $3.50 to $2.50. Yeah, I just wanted to say that was, I actually don't even connect to the grid. I don't export any power due to that. It's called zero export. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. I do appreciate it. Had my mic turned off. Next up is Malcolm Proudfit. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. Welcome to the committee. You're with Good Energy Solutions.
Yes, sir. My name is Malcolm Proudfit, and I'm the CEO of Good Energy Solutions. We are the top-ranked solar installation firm in the state of Kansas. We've been in business for over 15 years, installing solar in this state as well as in the state of Missouri, but we're based out of Lawrence, Kansas. I'm excited to testify before you today. Of course, I submitted written testimony. I encourage you all to read that. There's certainly more details in there than I can provide right now. But as an economist by education, I wanted to come up and make the business case for solar. Certainly, solar presents savings opportunities to the individual customers, individual homeowners, individual business owners. But from a business growth, economic growth perspective, I've been running Good Energy for 3 years. Started at the start of 2020, right before the pandemic. In spite of all those challenges, on top of a restrictive net metering policy in the state of Kansas, we have grown. Our staff has grown from 25 to just shy of 50. So we've doubled in the past 3 years. And I would hope that if we can get some common sense net metering policies put in place, that I could double my staff again, add 50 jobs in the state of Kansas. It's the solar industry is a industry that's primed to explode, and we just need to put policies in place that will get out of the way. An example that I gave in my written testimony is a grocery store near Lawrence that we proposed solar for. Now, of course, they're running refrigerators all day, and they have a huge base load. Truly, the system size they needed was roughly 400 to 500 kilowatts, but the net metering size limit in the state of Kansas is only 100 kilowatts. And so from a economic perspective, a microeconomic perspective, they made the decision to not go solar at that time.
We appreciate your testimony, and I need to cut you off. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Next up is Paul Snyder, Kansans for Lower Electric Rates. Welcome, Paul.
Good morning, Paul Snyder with Kansas for Lower Electric Rates. Eric Stafford said I could have his time. I don't know. I don't need it though. Well, you all drove in. It's a wonderful, good solar day outside, plenty of sunshine. As has been mentioned, Kansas has a lot of challenges with high electric rates. This is an opportunity for people to take some control of their energy future and try to lower their rates. Residential customers, when net metering first started, even before net metering was enacted in Kansas, some people invested in solar because of its economic or environmental benefits. Former ranking member Keither, I think, put solar on her house in the late 70s. But today, businesses are doing this for an economic reason, and the reason is very clear. There have been a lot of enhancements in solar the last 10 years since the net metering policy went into effect. Systems are cheaper. They last for over 30 years, and people need that return. Plus, add in some federal incentives can make this a very economic decision for many businesses. But there are constraints from the utility side and how those systems are connected and what sizes they could be. Very grateful that the size limits are increased under this bill. We would propose that a better limit would be closer to 1 megawatt, like is in other states. I put an example in my testimony. The IKEA store in Merriam has a 750 roughly kilowatt system. There are many, I challenge all of you when you go back home to start looking around at all the flat roofs that are around. I didn't realize this till I worked for a solar company. Flat roofs are everywhere, and we can really take advantage of that. With that, all in. Thank you very much.
Have 30 seconds left over. Thank you for testifying. Robert Rosenberg from Flint Hills Renewable Energy and Efficiency Company. Welcome to the committee.
Hello, thank you for hearing me. The Kansas Legislative Coordinating Council commissioned a report from AECOM in 2020, spent $284,000 to get that report. And that report was to find out why Kansas has higher rates, electric rates, than surrounding states. And what they concluded, or one of the conclusions, is that there's not enough solar. Because if the utility company has a problem because their electricity demand is greatest in July, usually on a summer hot day, but solar panels provide electricity during that same period, and if it's distributed throughout the state, then the entire infrastructure can be reduced to save all ratepayers money. Now, a utility company will make a third-grade argument that if there's a cross subsidy going on, if people who are not buying electricity are having to be are subsidized by people who are buying electricity, but that the AECOM report doesn't say that. It says just the opposite. And there are other advantages to distributed solar. One, if the utility company puts in a large array, one storm cloud can remove that entire array's production. If it's distributed around the state, where it's far more efficient because it uses more less land, and it's far more efficient because there's less transportation costs of electricity. It goes right from the plugging in solar panels like plugging in any other appliance. The electricity goes from the solar panel into your home. There's no loss. So 1% is not enough to test this system. And that's what the AECOM report said. So we can solve these problems.
I need to cut you off. Thank you.
We can solve these problems, and passing these bills will give us the chance.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Zach Pastora, Kansas Sierra Club. You got the floor.
Thank you, Chairman, members of the committee. Zach Pastora, Kansas lobbyist for the Sierra Club. We represent about 5,000 members. I woke up this morning looking at a beautiful Kansas sunrise, and I thought this would be a great day to talk about the power of solar, the warmth that we get to live, the sunlight to grow agriculture can be the same power that provides energy to help us get off expensive Wyoming coal that's hurting our planet. One thing I wanted to let you know is that Kansas is a top 10 state for sunny days. Across America, top 10. We're in the bottom 10 as far as producing solar energy. 0.2% of our energy in Kansas is produced at solar. If you believe in an all above Kansas energy policy, solar should be part of that. You heard from the previous conferee, Kansas solar can help lower electric rates. I've included in my testimony that solar PV generation will increasingly benefit Kansas ratepayers. It's straight out of the report. I also want to say that there are some limits right now to where Kansas solar businesses are doing more business in Missouri, Nebraska, and Oklahoma than they are doing in Kansas because of favorable rate structures like net metering, but also rebates, etc. There's more that this state can do. Top 10 solar resource to power our energy, homegrown, clean, and helping to lower rates. So all those things should give you some encouragement to pass this bill. One other thing, we're running up against some limits, some time limits, some capacity limits. Those need to be changed. We also think about how municipal utilities and cooperatives can do a better job at growing solar for rooftops. As you heard from a previous conferee, there's demand charges, there's access fees, there's other things that happen at the municipal and cooperative level that could be changed. The Supreme Court said just a couple of years ago that discriminatory fees on solar were illegal. I don't think that municipal utilities and cooperatives should have to escape the law too. Thank you.
Appreciate your testimony. Committee, that concludes the number of proponents. Do you have any questions for anybody at this point? Representative Bergeon, take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had a question for Mr. Snyder, and we continue to hear this from others as well. But I believe we just had a briefing from the Kansas Corporation Commission, Mr. Justin Grady, and he gave us some information that listed other states in the region. And according to the KCC, Kansas has competitive rates. So I'm a little bit confused by the information and the information that you presented, and I want you to help me understand.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. I have several concerns with the way that information was presented last week by Mr. Grady. There are several issues. Number one, the KCC, number one, on average rates, we never said that state average rates were the be-all end-all. It kind of provides a directional indication. We focus much more on average rates. I can provide you some more data, but when you look at average rates, investor-owned rates compared to investor-owned utilities around the state, so Iowa, Nebraska, Missouri, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Colorado, you'll see that Kansans pay anywhere from 10 to 40% more than those surrounding states. And that's data that I'm sure the KCC has, but chooses not to communicate. We look at that tighter grouping. The KCC looks at a much broader group of utilities all the way up in Minnesota. We've never claimed that a Minnesota utility is fighting for the same plants that the people in Kansas are. The other big fallacy with what the commission talked about last week was they kind of gave the insinuation that either through their actions or Evergy's actions, that's how we've had flat rates over the last 5 years. And nothing could be further from the truth. What is driving that flat rate are the hundreds of millions of dollars that Evergy has been a beneficiary of for state tax cuts, federal tax cuts, and to some, they do get some credit for the merger credits that came out of the merger agreement, if you will. Evergy will tell you that they've cut, operating expenses, $100 million, $200 million, whatever. And that's probably true. I don't know where you're going to file a rate case in April, but that's what the merger credits were for. That's a realization of that. They kind of leave the impression that somehow they've done that, but they haven't filed the base rate decrease at all. They can't do that because of the merger moratorium. They've done that twice to institute the federal tax cuts, again, which were hundreds of millions of dollars, and the state tax cuts that were not quite as influential as federal. So that's in summation, and we'll provide some more data, and we've got a hearing next week on KCC issues.
Okay. All right, thank you. Just a comment. I don't know what motivation the Kansas Corporation Commission would have to give us inaccurate information and not a good assessment of our current electric rates. So I'll be looking forward to your information that you'll be providing to the committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Schneider. Would you be kind enough to provide me also with that data that you intend to provide to Representative Bourgeon, and hopefully before the hearing next week, so I have an opportunity to review it?
Certainly.
Thank you.
Representative Penn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure who to direct the question to, since you seem to be the hottest ticket today. Mr. Snyder, please. Thank you for coming before us, and thank you for all of our presenters. I'm about an inch deep on this, so I need a little education. When we're talking about in terms of the maximum system export capacity versus generation, can you expound a little bit more about that? What is the need for that? What's the definition for it? Is there a calculation for that piece?
When they talk about a capacity limit, what they're talking about, we'll talk about solar. Each panel of solar has so many kilowatt of value. I don't know how much, 400 kilowatt, 400 watts. And so you add that up and have a collection. A normal house, I would say, has between 10 and 15 kilowatt, but there's some that certainly can accept much, much more. In the terms of a business, that's what I'm more familiar with. Some of them have great capacity. Again, I'm not sure if you've been to Merriam. That's the example I wanted to use for IKEA. It's a big store, and they have fit roughly, I have it exactly in here, 730 kW. So that's what they're talking about, is this. That's the system size, what that system can produce at peak sun limits. Does that help you? And does that fully answer your question? Or
pardon?
So, Mr. Chairman, it looks like Mr. Snyder wanted to phone a friend.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
If you'll allow.
Mark
that'll be the last question. So
Mark with King Solar. So really the way that language was written is basically to say on the customer side of the utility billing meter, there are customers that want to generate more than they are allowed to for one reason or another. They want to be 100% solar powered. Maybe they just say like, don't tell me what to do on my property for various reasons. They want to do what they want to do on their property. The size limits just are in relation to what the utility is required to accept. So if my house needs is appropriately sized as defined in the legislation, if I say I need a 10 kilowatt system on my house, that's what's appropriately sized. I could put 100 kilowatts on my house, do whatever I want with the energy, and then Evergy would only be required to accept 10. So that's really what the meat of the legislation is for. It is what's interactive with the grid, not what is allowed on my property.
thank you, Mr. Chairman. Absolutely. Last question, Vice Chair Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For Mr. Snyder also, in your testimony, you mentioned that this is an opportunity for people to lower their costs. I agree for those that select to install. What about for those not? You didn't really address the issue of cost shifting. I just wondered what your views were. Thank you.
Well, as it was expressed, there are scores of studies that have looked at whether when one customer makes a solar investment and someone else does not, what that cost shifting, to the extent there is any, what that is. And you're going to read, a dozen that say that there is a cost shift. It doesn't say that it supports all customers on the grid. I think the issue, particularly for generally when people install a net metering system, they're not doing it to make money off of selling power back to the grid. They're using it to power their own home or business. What the net metering is for is the incidentals where they're pushing energy off here or there. I would be the first to tell you, I don't think people should be oversizing their systems with the intention of sending it back to the grid, but you do. A business, for instance, may not be open on the weekends. And so the power that they're, generating can go back. I don't think it's any different personally than if you were to get a new air conditioner that's twice as efficient, you're now using less energy. That means other customers are picking up, what you were spending but aren't now. To me, it equates the same way. Someone obviously is taking advantage of an opportunity and should be able to do that.
All right. Hurry up.
Yeah, Mr. I don't know if I'm on or off here. Mr. Rosenberg, can I ask you a question also? You mentioned that the utility companies have a summer peak, which is true, but are you suggesting that the peak for generation of a solar is coincident with like a 4 o'clock hot summer day peak for generation?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. That the sun, as we know, does not go down at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. It's still plenty bright. So we're getting power up until 5:36. And if you aim your panels to the west, you get electricity till sundown. And you can have policies like time of use rates that would encourage somebody to do that. So it can solve 100% of the utilities problem of managing that peak demand with things like time of use rates or demand side programs like thermostat control programs, which I have in my house. Evergy turns off my air conditioner compressor on those hot summer days. That's fine by me. As long as you don't have to build a new power plant, it will save me money.
Thank you.
That concludes the questions for the proponents. We're moving on to neutral. We have Patrick Orr from CURB. Patrick, take it away.
Good morning, Chairman Dupwardang and members of the House Energy, Utilities, and Telecommunications Committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify regarding House Bill 2228. My name is Patrick Orr. I am a rate analyst for the Citizens Utility Ratepayer Board, better known as CURB. CURB is the advocate for residential and small commercial ratepayers before the Kansas Corporation Commission and the Kansas Legislature. And my testimony reflects the interests of these utility ratepayer classes regarding House Bill 2228. Currently, electric utilities shall make net metering available on a first-come, first-served basis to customer generators until the total rate generation of all rate. Thank you. Of all net metering systems equal 1% of the utility's peak demand from the previous year. House Bill 2228 would increase that amount to 10%, or from 1% to 10%, and would also amend statutes to allow the utility to offer all customer generators a tariff or contract equal in electric rate structure and monthly charges, regardless of whether the customer is an eligible generator operating renewable energy resources on or before July 1st of 2014. Currently, net energy generated under an interconnect agreement before July 2014 is carried forward and credited against energy consumption in later months until it expires March 31st of each year. This provision sunsets on January 1st of 2030. And for customers with renewable energy resources after July 1st, 2014, their net excess energy in any given month is credited to their customer at a rate of 100% of the utility's monthly average cost of energy per kilowatt.
Okay, I need to cut you off.
Okay.
Thank
and
you.
Herb wishes to testify neutral on this bill. Thank you.
Okay, appreciate you. We also have written testimony from Leo Hanos with Kansas Corporation Commission, and I will make another comment. We've got a bunch of written only, and it is included in your packets, whether it be proponent, neutral, or opponent. So thank you to Mindy for putting all that together.
Can I make?
Sure, absolutely.
Thank you. Just another reminder to the committee that we received written text from most of these conferees. So make sure and make reference to the points that they were able to make and are going to be able to make within their 2 minutes and further on. So it'd still be there.
Chairman,
I'm sorry, step up to, and I just can't hear you. Yeah. That'd be fine. Go ahead. 2 minutes.
In the interest of time, I just want to make one clear. So this bill would expand to requiring 118 municipals and 28 co-ops to be subject to the net metering rules. And one thing to keep in mind is this arrangement can end up causing some fluctuations of power. How the co-op or municipal system, it's a very small system, can handle this diversity of solar being intermittent during the day. There's a provision in 1264B3, which didn't change, which allows the operator to set operating standards for the utility in order to how they were going to deal with any kind of fluctuations that may come up. Now, if there's a dispute over those operating standards for an IOU, the KCC has a complaint process where we would actually resolve those complaints. We don't have that authority with municipals or co-ops. So any type of dispute, whether it's a contract dispute of putting too much power back across the substation onto the transmission grid, or any other type of voltage fluctuations, that type of thing, we would not have authority to address that. It would be tipped strictly with the city itself. That's really what I want to add. My other comments are in writing. If you have any questions, I
okay. Appreciate you. I didn't see you hiding back there, so
thanks
fine. For being here. Committee, let's move on to the opponents. First up, we've got Doug Shepard with the Kansas Electric Cooperatives. Welcome to the committee, Doug.
Morning, Chair, members of the committee. My name is Doug Shepard, representing Kansas Electric Cooperatives. The KEC makes up 28 or 29 member cooperatives in the state. My testimony today is on behalf of 28 of those. One of those, Midwest Energy, is a member of KEC, but is not taking a position on this bill. One of the things I want to do real quick, we've got a couple of other presenters that will talk about some of the technical aspects of it. But because we've got such a new committee, many on the committee have not been in the legislature before, just to make 2 quick points about the cooperative difference and how cooperatives differ from municipalities and investor-owned utilities. So cooperatives are they're owned by their consumer members. They're governed by their consumer members through a member-elected board, and provide service in areas that are very difficult to serve in terms of rural areas, and it's difficult to make that business case. Because of that, years ago, the legislature allowed cooperatives to exempt them, or did not apply the net metering statute to cooperatives. That's important as if you look at my testimony about the cost shift and what that means on a small rural company versus a large investor-owned utility. The other thing that I want to talk or that I want to mention is that the rural electric cooperatives are not opposed to renewable generation. We've got members, the co-ops themselves, that have installed solar. We've got a lot of members, end consumer members, that have embraced renewables, and we've got a lot of good Kansas-based solar companies that our members work well with. Our concern is that this rush to increase the limits will bring in a lot of out-of-state new upstarts, and that may not have the best interests of our members at heart. We do. We're able to work with our members. Our members work with their members to make sure that these systems are right sized. This statute or this bill would blow up or really increase the amount of allowable generation, which causes concern for us in that we can't take as much. And one last point, Mr. Chairman, is that Leo mentioned it too, that about the physics of being able to take, there's only so much energy that you can take from these renewable generation providers, and well-meaning legislation cannot trump physics. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Appreciate it. Mark Scheib, hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly, with Heartland Rural Electric Cooperative.
Good morning, Chairman and committee. My name is Mark Scheib. I'm the Chief Executive Officer at Heartland Rural Electric Co-op. So we serve the rural parts of eastern Kansas, about 11,500 meters. It's about 3 meters per electric mile that we have. We are one of the co-ops that Doug had mentioned that has installed solar. So we do have 2 small utility scale projects. So we understand the value of solar, and that's helping our members save money. So 3 main things, so you can read through my testimony, but 3 main things I wanted to point out was with the change in the net metering, I echo Doug's comments about the potential of predatory installers coming in. We have good relationships with our current installers. There was one particular member of ours that wanted to install solar at her small home and business. The installer submitted the paperwork, and when we started reviewing it, we looked at it, and it was $150,000 worth of solar that they were looking to put in, but they only really needed $50,000. And so because we're able to help our members right size the systems and ensure that they get a return on investment for them, that's what we do as a co-op. But we were able to save her $100,000 in the project. And so the likelihood of increasing the net metering pieces of it, it just decreases our likelihood of being able to help take care of our members. From a subsidization that Doug mentioned, we looked at it in our cost of service study. 7 kilowatts of solar on average was being subsidized by non-solar members by $762. When I looked at the maximum for last year, 2022, is about $2,400. So that's more than the average low income pays on their bill. So on page 2 of my testimony at the bottom, there's a graph shows solar production versus when the peak window is. And in there, you can see that the maximum solar production around noon is when electricity is inexpensive compared to when it's peak and is more expensive. And so even modernizing electric rates wouldn't necessarily solve this, especially if we are looking at what the cost of energy is. We need to make sure that we're providing good payback for the members. Last thing, Doug mentioned the back feed on the grid. Original grid was designed to have one-way feed of electricity. And when we reverse it, especially in the rural environment, it's going to have costly upgrades for the infrastructure. So we just ask that either electric co-ops stay out of the bill or that it is opposed by the committee. So
appreciate your testimony. Next up is Michael Volker, Brown Atchison Electric Cooperative. Welcome to the committee, sir.
Thank you and good morning. I am Michael Volker. I'm the manager at 2 electric cooperatives, both Brown Atchison and Donovan Electric. I'm an economist, and economists evaluate the value of policy based on 2 parameters. Does it lead to better efficiency, meaning lower prices, and does it lead to equitable distribution of wealth or equity? Regarding HB 2228, the end result will be higher prices, not lower prices. Who makes up for the higher cost of power purchased from a net meter generator? It is all other members of the distribution cooperative or utility. In addition to the economic efficiency aspect, meaning lower prices, economists consider equity in evaluation of policy. Does expanded net metering policy lead to better distribution of wealth in society? Again, the answer is no. There have been a number of published articles discussing income levels and who receives the benefits of net metering subsidies. For example, a Politico article from March 31st, 2021, titled California's Rooftop Solar Collides with Equity Concerns, among others. California has now recently cut back on their subsidies to solar, rooftop solar. I also want to discuss the impact on the members of the cooperatives that I manage. These cooperatives are small, rural, and spread out with high distribution system costs because of that. The costs of the distribution system are fixed. And when behind the meter generation is sold, although there is no less energy consumed, the volume of sales from the cooperative declines. Since the majority of the distribution system costs are fixed and the costs are recovered through volumetric energy charges, simple math says the prices must go up. The result is that the prices go up to lower income individuals that do not have the wherewithal to install behind the meter generation. Again, one of my points about this bill is that it encourages inefficient and regressive distributed generation.
Need to cut you off. I appreciate you making the trip in here. Thank you so much. Next, from my home district, Scott Ayers, Sedgwick County Electric Cooperative. Welcome to the committee.
Good morning, Chairman, Committee. My name is Scott Ayers. I'm CEO of Sedgwick County Electric Cooperative, headquartered in Cheney. I've worked for them for 32 years. I feel like I know the system. I started out as a journeyman lineman, then moved into engineering, and I'm the CEO. We're one of those co-ops that's seen a very large influx of installers coming in from California, Florida. They're coming in from all over right now, and we're getting oversized systems on our grid with only 6 members per mile. It's detrimental to us because our transmission provider does not allow us to push that power back on the grid, as Mark with King Solar mentioned. It's not that we are against solar. We have 2 solar farms ourselves that are over 1 megawatt that start at the substation, push the power out. When you start pushing backfeed of that many kW back on our system, it affects the reclosures, it affects our regulators, and one set of reclosures is over $30,000. And I don't think when they come and want to connect, which solar install am I going to put that on? So I think that's going to be a big deal. Our board of directors several years ago went from the 1% to the 10%, and we're already at 5%. So, and if I said it wrong, it's 1% to 5%, and we're approaching that 5% now. And we have one substation that we cannot accept any more solar on just because we're pushing so much back onto the system. So, the transformers, wire, and everything, they were only made for the members' load, not excess energy production put back on it. And as I'm figuring, we take our 8,000 meters and put back the excess kW, we're going to end up with a system instead of being 38 megawatts. It's about 100 megawatts, and I don't have anyone to sell it to. So I'll yield my time back.
No, I appreciate your testimony. That was some good information there. Thanks, sir, for making the trip up here too. Representing the municipalities, Kimberly Jenker Savati, are you there? You are. Welcome, and you have the floor.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to be here before you representing Kansas Municipal Utilities. And I apologize, Brad Mears, our executive director, would be here typically. However, he is down in the House Water Committee helping the discussion related to water policy in the state. So we do appear before you on behalf of House Bill 2228 in opposition, in large part because when the energy bill was written in 2009, and I was here, those conversations began in 2007 and honestly dominated the legislative process from 07, 08, and 09. And I was here and involved in all of those conversations. And at that point, the decision was made by policymakers and all the different iterations of the bill that municipal utilities, because of the fact that there are 118 across our state, would be exempt from the net metering statutes, not necessarily exempt from having net metering policies. We adhere also to parallel generation policies, but the state mandate related to net metering statutes would not take effect on behalf of the municipal utilities, in large part because we have 118. So our systems range from the size of 65,000 in Kansas City Board of Public Utilities down to communities with meters of 25. So how do you create a state policy that works for one and that also works for the other? The majority of our systems have about 867 customers on it. So if you have a handful of additional customers coming on, that can, under a state mandated requirement, that can have a pretty significant impact on that community's system. So what we've always advocated for and what we've done since the beginning is created a distributed generation toolkit. We've worked with all of our communities to encourage them to enact net metering policies that are friendly, that allow for new generation to come online. We've been very cognizant of all the discussions with the Kansas Supreme Court and made sure that we're not enacting any discriminatory policies. So we very much support the integration of renewable energy. We have the first ever battery storage project in the state, in SPP's region. We have one of the most renewably integrated utilities on BPU. We have community solar projects, but we strongly believe that requirement for 118 municipal utilities to adhere to a state statute is probably beyond our parameters.
Thank you for testifying. I appreciate you coming.
Thank you.
So next up is Jeff Martin from Evergy. Welcome to the committee, Jeff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. First of all, Evergy strongly opposes this bill for several reasons. We believe that the current net metering laws don't impede solar growth in this region. When we look at the number of solar installers, we've gone from 5 to 50 installers that we work with in the last 5 years. We believe we're still 5 years away from the 1% cap. So to increase it to 10% is just way before its time. Kansas outpaces Missouri for solar installations, even though there are more incentives for installing solar in Missouri. All of these items point to growth in the number of net metering customers in the future. Therefore, we see no need for changes to the current law. The proposals in House Bill 2228 are regressive in nature and will increase costs to non-distributive generation customers that are limited in the current law. Also, the removal of KSA 66-1265D limits our ability to legally address the pricing issues that have been proven to exist in favor of distributive generation customers. The fact is that distributive generation customers rely on the utilities to provide the electric system for them to supplement their power needs when their generation is not adequate, and they rely on that same system to transport their excess generation when their generation output is more than they need, all without paying their fair share for the electric system and pushing that burden on the customers who cannot afford their own generation systems or live in a location where it's not permitted. Mr. Chairman and committee, we appreciate the opportunity to present our view. Net metering is one of the most difficult topics that a utility faces in any state. We believe there are reasonable changes that could be looked at in this area, but this bill is not it. In fact, I think one of the biggest barriers to entry for solar is that we do have competitive rates and the economics simply don't pencil out. Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming. I do appreciate it. The next two I'm showing is written only. Whitney, I know you're here in the room. Is it just written only? You're welcome if you want to make some comments. But
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I was double booked this morning, so I wasn't sure I could be here, but I appreciate the opportunity. I represent Liberty Utilities. We were a part of the grand compromise of 2014 on net metering. Some of you were around, maybe on not in the legislature, Representative Schreiber, but we feel the issue has worked. And that has provided opportunity for people who want to be in that business. Something that we talked about back when that bill was passed and subsequent to that is the utility is still required to provide 100%, excess of 100% of generation capacity and delivery to all of their customers, regardless of whether they have a net metering system on their house or not. So it's not like it's a cost reduction to have someone with a net metering system pushing small pieces of energy back to the system for redistribution. There are technical challenges to that. Also timing issues and not necessarily when it's needed by the utility. And again, we also talked about this in terms of like the demand charge and the like. It's an insurance policy. If you want to be able to flip your switch and have the lights come on 24/7, 365 days a year, you are reliant upon your local utility provider to be in position to be able to provide you electricity when you need it, when the sun doesn't shine. You want to completely go off the grid, it's not an issue, but most don't. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Committee, that does conclude. It looks like the last one is written only from Bruce Mueller. Does anybody have questions for the opponents, starting with Representative Schreiber?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've actually got two, but I'll try to make them quick. Yeah, I know. I didn't ask the first time. So the first one would be for Doug Shepard. And you mentioned something that has come up recently on maybe some bad actors coming in and installing systems. Is that an area where we've done kind of a registration process with roofers when they come in after storms and so forth? Is that something that you think may be appropriate at this point?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Representative. We've talked about that internally because as one of the other conferees mentioned, that we've had these people come in and recommend larger units than they needed. They either put them on the north side of the house or they're shaded by trees. Not only that, they're putting equipment on a roof that, what that does to the life of the roof and whether it's good installation. So these are long-term installations. So I think there is a need for some type of registration or something. Like I said, there are a number of Kansas-based installers that our members have worked with that are good. Our concern is those that are going to come in to make a quick buck and then they'll be gone.
Okay, thank you. And then for Jeff Martin, the 10% figure for raising it from 1% to 10%, what does that represent on Westar's peak demand now? And then what is its effect on its system?
Yes, thank you for that question. 10% represents roughly the size of Wolf Creek nuclear power plant. If you look at that, if we had to, for instance, replace that unit with this bill, they would come in and say the proposal would be intermittent power, non-dispatchable, at the price of full retail value, as well as we don't know exactly where that unit's going to be. It's going to be spread across your entire system. If we got a proposal like that at a 10% to try to replace Wolf Creek, it would absolutely be thrown out. That is not good for our customers. It's not good for the utility.
When you say thrown out, is that something that you'd take to the commission? And
we wouldn't even look at that as an opportunity for that proposal. That we've got better options out there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Last question, Representative Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, I hope I have two quick ones, one for Scott Ayers and one for Doug Shepard. Whoever can arrive at the microphone first gets to go first. Hello, Mr. Ayers. Nice to see you again this morning. I believe you explained that our transmission provider will not allow us to, and my word is backfeed. I can't remember what word you used. In other words, sell power back, excess power back to your transmission provider. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Who is your transmission provider?
We purchase our power through KEPCO.
Thank you.
And then that comes through Evergy lines. But it does, if I could,
sure,
it does cause them problems as far as reclosing, the same type of problems as it does on our operated distribution system. So
because they haven't made any preparations to be bi-directional?
No, not as much as the reclosures and frequency. And
we're out of time. We'll have to take this up later. My question for Mr. Shepard is, I think I heard you say that one of your members, Midwest Energy, is not an opponent of the net metering bill. Is their circumstance different than the rest of your members, or are they just asleep at the switch? Or why is it they don't oppose this like everybody else?
Thank you for that question, Representative. Midwest Energy has taken the action to restructure the rates in that they've implemented a three-part rate for all customers, not just distributed generation, but all customers. And I think that's something that you're going to see if this cost shift appears, that you're going to see either fixed costs are going to have to go up to recover those costs or move to a three-part rate for all.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I hope you can educate me more about what Midwest Energy is doing, but not here today. Thanks.
Okay. Appreciate the questions and for everybody coming to testify on that. And with that, I'm now going to close the hearing on 2228. Okay, committee, we're going to open the hearing on House Bill 2227. Can I have the reviser give us a quick overview of it? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Committee, House Bill 2227 deals with third-party power purchase agreements. Now, these power purchase agreements that this bill is dealing with are not those large wholesale power purchase agreements. These are power purchase agreements where a rooftop solar system or a wind system, as provided under Section 1 of this bill, could be installed on the premises of a customer. And you could enter into a power purchase agreement with the installer to purchase the power and essentially finance the cost of the installation of that system. So that is what Section 1 authorizes, is customer generators to enter into those power purchase agreements to purchase that power, finance the system. Section 2 of the bill exempts those sales of electricity, since any person, entity who's providing electricity in the state of Kansas is defined as a public utility under 66104 under Kansas law. This provision would exempt those power purchase sales from public utility regulation. Therefore, the KCC would not regulate those sales. Section 3 of the bill would exempt those power purchase agreements from the Retail Electric Suppliers Act. Again, the Retail Electric Suppliers Act says that only certificated utilities in their certificated service territory can sell electricity. So therefore, these power purchase agreements and sales of electricity pursuant to these agreements would be exempted from the Retail Electric Suppliers Act. Section 4 of the bill amends, again, the parallel generation statute. And this amendment would essentially include those power purchase agreements within the parallel generation statute. And you'll see in Section 5, it would include those agreements within the net metering statute as well, by striking requirements that a facility or a system be owned by the customer generator. Instead, it would be a customer generator system and could include a system installed pursuant to a power purchase agreement, since the ownership of that system would essentially be the person supplying that unit. Also, it's Section 4 in the parallel generation statute would add some entities that could interconnect their systems pursuant to parallel generation. So currently, as we previously discussed, Dodge City Community College, Cloud County Community College can be included in parallel generation. What this bill would do is would add to those entities subject to that 1.5 megawatt capacity limitation on those systems. So it would add religious institutions, hospitals, and then it would open it up to all schools and colleges up to that 1.5 megawatts. Additionally, this Section 4 would open it up to military installations, and the bill does not provide a set capacity limit for military installations. Again, I would note the provisions under parallel generation require a system to be sized appropriately for the anticipated load. And then finally, Section 5 would add these power purchase agreements under the net metering law. So under parallel generation and net metering, utilities would have to contract with customers, generators who are entering into these power purchase agreements. And Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to stand for questions.
Committee, you've heard the description of the bill by the reviser. Are there any questions? Representative Schreiber.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Nick. On the last page of the bill, you kind of covered it right at the end, the Section 5. So the way I read that is that the customer, the owner-operator that's defined in 2227 could also make use of the net metering bill as well, or current statutes and so forth.
Yes. So
they're not locked into just parallel generation. They could do net metering as well.
Yes, for those, this would not change the investor-owned. This would net metering would stick to, under this bill, investor-owned utilities. It wouldn't add munis or co-ops to it. But yes, you're correct that under this bill, there would be the option if you were in IOU territory, you would have the option to use parallel generation with that power purchase agreement or the net metering interconnection.
Does that you mentioned earlier about the 4% limit for parallel gen and 10% for net metering are the proposed limits. So how does that happen if they kind of start on one and then switch to the other? I mean, how do you?
So this bill wouldn't change that percentage. Under net metering, it would still be at 1% for the IOU total capacity for the prior year. I believe those two percentages are unique and their own distinguishable percentages. So if the utility has a max capacity of parallel generation customers, it's 4%. The net metering customers, it's 1%.
You could have a total of 5 then, theoretically.
Yes, probably if you're adding those two together, yes, then IOU could have a total of 5.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions for the reviser? Not seeing any. Let's move on to the proponents. I don't know if Eric Stafford has Eric, are you here yet? Okay, moving right along to Jessica Lucas with Clean Energy Business Council. Okay, the next one up is Stanley Rasmussen, Environmental Coordinator, Department of Defense. Welcome to the committee, sir.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you all for letting me speak here today. I am Stan Rasmussen. I am the Department of Defense Environmental Coordinator for the state of Kansas. You might be asking yourself, why is the military interested in this bill? Department of Defense has instructed the services to look at every military installation, evaluate what our critical missions are at those military installations, and then evaluate how much energy, water, and sewer it takes to operate those critical missions for at least 14 days off the grid. So every military installation, including ours in Kansas, is doing that evaluation, looking at those critical missions, and then figuring out how much energy do we need to operate those off of the grid, and then we're having to budget for those. We see this bill as providing us an opportunity to enhance and give us options for our energy security and resilience at our military installations. And we also see it as a potential to offer cost savings at our military installations. So I'd be happy to answer questions when the time is right. But
okay,
that's why we support this
appreciate your testimony. Thanks for making the trip over here. Next up is former Senate President David Kerr. Welcome back to the committee. Good to see you, sir. And you represent Kansas Ethanol.
I do.
Okay.
Chairman of the board of Kansas Ethanol and have been since it started production in 2008. We produce 80 million gallons of clean fuel a year. We also produce 500,000 tons of distillers' grains, a high protein feed that's sold to feedlots in the area. We even capture some of our CO2 and sell it to to meat packers for the purpose of flash freezing their meat, including your pizza toppings. There are 7 plants, not dissimilar to ours, around the state, and taken together, we are a huge market for what Kansas farmers grow, both corn and sorghum. Like all fuel producers, we're trying to figure out ways to lower the carbon in our fuel. And in our case, we've made some huge capital investments to lower our carbon, and we have been successful with both generation power or generation system and combined heat and power. And we're right on the verge of meeting the federal goal of advanced biofuel, which requires you to be 50% below gasoline in your carbon score. If we were able to buy some very low carbon solar energy, it would probably put us under that goal year round, thereby gaining us a modest but significant additional value to the fuel that we do produce. It would not do with the limits that you have in this bill. We're a major producer already of our own electricity. We even sell 15 megawatts back into the grid. But the important thing is that if we could get this lower carbon, it would be very beneficial for us. But the limits would have to be raised to perhaps 2 megawatts, something in that neighborhood.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for showing.
Happy to answer
Thank
questions.
you for your testimony, David. Next up is John Chively, Sisters of Charity. Welcome to the committee, sir.
Good morning, Chairman, members of the committee. My name is John Chively. I am the lead coordinator of the Sisters of Charity of Leavenworth Office of Justice, Peace, and Integrity of Creation. The Sisters of Charity follow the traditions of St. Vincent de Paul and St. Louise de Marillac, who began the Daughters of Charity in France, with a particular emphasis on serving the poor and the vulnerable. Last year, in line with our commitment to be good stewards of God's creation, the earth, we wrote a partial grant to install renewable energy with a local nonprofit partner. We already have quite a bit of renewable energy on our campus, and so we wanted to live out our mission by helping others switch to renewable. Now, the problem is that we would have either needed the full amount granted up front, which wasn't really a possibility, or we would need to take out a loan, which is really difficult and cost prohibitive if you can even acquire a loan. And so in working with developers, we talked with a number of people outside of Kansas who talked about power purchase agreements, but we soon found that without PPAs, there really wasn't a reliable path to financing for this nonprofit, this faith nonprofit. And so without PPAs, faith communities, religious institutions, schools, nonprofits looking to install renewables are really at a serious disadvantage. So we support this bill not only for our benefit, but so that many other Kansans, particularly poor Kansans or those serving Kansans living in poverty, can access renewable and clean energy. I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Okay. Appreciate your testimony. Next up, Malcolm Proudfit, Good Energy Solutions. And I understand that you're going to take some of Jessica's minutes there.
I suppose.
No?
Sure, absolutely. I'm going to explain PPAs in more detail for perhaps the benefit of some other members. 4 minutes. Okay. Again, I'm Malcolm Proudfit. I'm the CEO of Good Energy Solutions, one of the top-ranked solar installers in the state of Kansas. I started my career in solar in 2016 back in Utah, where I worked for a company called Vivint Solar. At the time, they were the #2 installer in the nation, installing solar all across the country. The primary vehicle that they used to facilitate the installation of solar was power purchase agreements. Now, the way a power purchase agreement works, think of it in the context of the rent versus buy situation. In the state of Kansas, you can only buy a solar system, whether you pay for it upfront in cash or you finance it over a certain time period. With a PPA, a host customer contracts with a developer to have a system installed. Now, the developer retains ownership of that system and facilitates its installation, whether they install it or they have somebody install the system for them. Now, the host customer and the developer agree contractually on the rate that that customer will pay per kilowatt hour. And typically, the rate that they pay is a little bit less than what they would have been paying with the utility. The additional benefit of a PPA to the host customer is that there's no upfront capital costs. They're not putting a down payment down on a loan. They just simply agree with the developer to pay for every kilowatt hour that this system produces. So these systems have to be correctly sized, and the developer has an interest in doing that because they want their customer to be able to pay for everything the system puts out. The benefits to a PPA type structure are, again, the host customer has no upfront capital costs. They're not on the hook for the maintenance of the system. That is the developer's responsibility for the contract term. And on the developer's end of things, they are retaining ownership of tax credits for this system because they are retaining ownership. So either they use those tax credits or they sell them on the open market. PPAs are a great vehicle for low-income homeowners or homeowners with less than great credit to finance a solar system and get one installed on their home and see monthly cost savings on their bills. So you can see, hopefully you can see from my explanation why PPAs are sometimes referred to as solar as a service, again, in that rent versus buy continuum. But PPAs certainly will help solar proliferate in our state, particularly serving lower income Kansans, and organizations like schools, hospitals, religious organizations, and others that were mentioned that could benefit from solar. And again, happy to stand for any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. Next up is Michelle Milburn from Stanton Electric. Okay, that's fine. Paul Snyder, Kansans for Lower Electric Rates.
Thank you, committee. It's glad to be back. Paul Snyder with Kansas for Lower Electric Rates. Electric rates in Kansas are still not competitive, and this is another tool that can help businesses take some back economic freedom and control their cost. Before I dig into everything, let me just quickly explain the difference between this bill and the past bill. Net metering, if you have excess generation that you push onto the grid, if you do that within your billing period or a month, let's say, that just provides a full credit back to you. And if you have excess generation that you didn't push back at the end of the month, you get paid at the utilities, basically avoided cost for energy. The previous bill does seek to change that, but that's how it is today. Parallel generation works somewhat similarly. When you push energy out, you don't get a credit for it. You just get an actual bill credit or monetary credit. You get paid at the utilities avoided cost of energy. So that right now is roughly 2.5 to 3 cents is my guess. You can correct me if I'm wrong, where the retail rate for a residential customer would be about 12 to 13 cents. So that's what we're dealing with here. Net metering lets you retain and credit parallel generation just as kind of a one-time ongoing transaction. So basically the previous conferee talked about the value of a PPA. It eliminates the need for a business to come up with capital cost or leasing cost to get a system and get energy. You don't have to deal with the CPA and go through all that. It's basically just like contracting for internet service. You're going to contract with someone for a kilowatt hour price that you're going to pay to get energy from that system. Makes it very simple. I would offer this bill to be greatly improved by increasing the limits. Let's not just dip our toe in. If we're going to do this, let's give businesses a real opportunity to contract with someone for their energy usage. I suggest a limit of closer to 10 megawatts. And also, don't limit it just to a facility on their property. Why not let them, a customer, contract with one of the many wind farms or solar farms? We export power right now to Google, to Kohler, Royal Caribbean, T-Mobile, Target. Why not let our own Kansas businesses take advantage of the Kansas renewable energy that's here right now?
Good job. Thank you for testifying, sir. Next up is Brett Ragsdale with, is it Wilden Performance Engineering?
Good morning, committee. Thank you for the opportunity to talk. Good morning. So Wildan is a national company, energy company. We started, our division is Wildan Performance Engineering. We started as a small business out of Lawrence. We do energy services, so it's energy savings performance contracting. So typically our customers are school districts, municipalities, universities. So we are accredited with the KCC's FCIP program. Our division president, like myself, are both mechanical engineers from Kansas State. So we've got some local roots. So we're not the out of the state company kind of trying to come here and rip people off. I want to talk about a particular customer that is St. Benedict's Abbey on the campus of Benedictine College in Atchison. So the monks of St. Benedictine very much like the sisters in Leavenworth, really want to decarbonize their 100-year-old limestone monastery. So it's going to be a great story. It's going to still has a smokestack where they burn coal, and we're going to make that all electric if we can afford it. Part of that is a 750 kilowatt array that's going to be on their property. So we would be a lot further along with this project had PPAs been an option, because there are upfront costs with solar that you don't have with a fuel system. If they just wanted to upgrade their boilers to more efficient boilers, that would be a lot less money. And then you pay for it over time with the fuel that you burn, with all the requisite problems that creates for the environment that they're trying to get away from. So our division also has offices all around the country, Denver, Dallas, all up the West Coast. Most of those states allow PPAs. So we just need to, in Kansas, level the playing field and be able to attract more of this business and more of this investment in solar to our state, in my opinion.
Very good. Thank you for testifying, Mr. Ragsdale. Next up is Robert Rosenberg, Flint Hills Renewable Energy.
Yeah, yes, Robert Rosenberg with Flint Hills Renewable Energy and Efficiency Co-op. We are a group of volunteers who help people put up solar panels on their roof. We've helped about 100 customers do that. I don't know how many of you all have solar panels, but I briefly want to explain how it works. A solar panel with a microinverter is about $500, and so this is not just for rich people. And PPAs are a financing option that even helps other people. You know, a lot of helps, especially low income, because low income often don't have space on their roof or they don't own their home. And a power purchase agreement will allow a third-party developer to put solar panels on a parking lot and sell the power at a reduced price to people who can't afford the higher price or shouldn't have to pay the higher price. So that's why it's it's a good thing to have the option of a third party power purchase agreements. Now, Kansas is one of the few states that doesn't allow it, and Wikipedia, if that can be trusted, I think it said 7 states don't allow power purchase agreements. And I don't know why that is, except for maybe bad actors come in and take advantage of people. But we can avoid that with other ways. I'm certain. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zach Pastora, Kansas Sierra Club.
Thank you, Chairman, members of the committee. The Kansas Sierra Club is proud to support House Bill 2227. My testimony's got the green tree in the upper corner. I encourage you to read it. We think power purchase agreements are an innovative financing solution to help grow solar in Kansas. It provides energy price predictability and helps immediately lower emissions for businesses or nonprofits, especially that are looking to also take control of their bills. One thing, my information is at least 29 states have provided for power purchase agreements for solar, and including state neighbors of Iowa, Arkansas, Oklahoma, and Colorado. And if you review the KCC's information on rate competitiveness, you'll see that in those states, Iowa, Arkansas, Oklahoma, and Colorado all have either lower average prices for their electricity or lower average monthly bills for their residential customers. And all of them have power purchase agreement statutes in place. I think that's really important. Arkansas, it's got 6 times more solar in Kansas, has a worse resource for solar, yet they're able to stay competitive. Iowa is ranked 26th for the sun. I told you we were in top 10, yet they're 27th for solar and have 6 times more solar. So their utilities and their state has figured out how to utilize their homegrown resource and keep electric bills low. So I would encourage our state to do the same. One thing I think is really important, power purchase agreements allow for leverage the private capital So businesses and nonprofits and even residents that want to install on their own solar, but power purchase agreements, that private capital is going to public goods. And that public good serves utility benefits. And don't take it from me. This is from the legislative rate study from AECOM that shows numerous utility benefits from adopting more solar. So
to cut you off. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Committee, we're going to run over just a little bit. I promise to get you out of here as soon as possible. And we'll just hold questions till the very end, if you don't mind. Under neutrals, we've got Patrick Orr with Curb. You have the floor for a couple minutes here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, my name is Patrick Orr with the Citizens Utility Ratepayer Board, better known as CURB. I'll make this brief. You have my written testimony, I believe, in your packet. CURB represents the interests of residential and small commercial ratepayers who may desire to use renewable energy like solar or wind to offset their use of retail electric energy provided by utilities. Retail electric customers, allowing them to invest in solar and wind energy for their own use may help diversify energy resources in our state. CURB wishes to testify neutral for this bill. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you again. I appreciate it. For opponents, where we've got Doug Shepard with Kansas Electric Co-op. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee. We'll skip over you've all been sufficiently briefed on cooperatives, so I'll get right to the point. On the PPA bill, three things that I want to remind you. This is kind of sold as a unique financing arrangement to encourage renewable energy. This really can be also thought of as a retail wheeling light. Those of you that have been around a while, you remember that 20 some years ago, retail wheeling would allow a third party company to come in and sell electricity directly to the utility customers. This is one way to get around that. They're not going to use the generation transmission assets of the utility, but they would sell directly. In this case, also strands not only the generation assets, but the transmission and distribution assets. This is also being driven by companies that are trying to meet their ESG goals. And so they're being directed, these local companies are being directed from out of state headquarters saying you must figure out a way to meet these ESG goals. And so this is one way that they're trying to do that. Now they could go out and buy renewable energy credits, would be another alternative, but then that would take out the ability for third party companies to take advantage of the tax credits. The second thing I want to mention is that, make no mistake, this is a cost shift. The utility builds all of their costs into their energy rate, or the majority of their costs, and if they sell fewer kilowatt hours, those costs need to be made up somewhere. Most utilities are 80% fixed costs, 20% variable. So if they sell fewer kilowatt hours, they're going to have to either redesign their rates or raise the rates. The last thing I would mention, I didn't make it into my written testimony, but it was in the previous bill, is that co-ops oppose this. We would ask that if you do work it, that you exempt us, and we'd be glad to work with staff to offer a amendment.
Okay, thank you again for testifying. Lindsay Campbell with Pioneer Electric Co-op. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair, members of the committee. My name is Lindsay Campbell. I am the Assistant CEO and General Counsel for Pioneer Electric Cooperative and Southern Pioneer Electric Company. We serve about 34,000 meters in Southwest and portions of South Central Kansas. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today to share our concerns with House Bill 2227, specifically the significant rate impacts that this bill would have on all of our customers. This legislation would allow third parties to effectively or to serve our customers. However, we, the utility, would still have the statutory obligation to hold facilities in reserve to serve our customers' peak demands when those renewable resources are not producing. As explained by Mr. Shepard with the KEC, these customers can avoid paying their fair share of the fixed costs for these facilities, thus shifting the cost to everybody else through rate increases. The potential negative effects of this on utilities like Pioneer and Southern Pioneer are huge because the majority of our customer load is large commercial industrial at about 70%. So we have a significant amount of large investment in electric infrastructure. And it would take just about a few of these customers to contract with a renewable energy supplier under a PPA to result in rate shock to all of our customers, including residential customers. So, for example, on the Pioneer side, our two largest customers comprise about a combined 25% of our total energy sales. And on the Southern Pioneer side, even more so, our two largest customers, one of which is a midstream gas processing facility, the other is a meatpacking plant, comprise 53% of our energy sales. That being said, we do know that, and I go out and I visit with about 60, a group of 60 of our large key account loads. And we do know that many of them are considering installing behind the meter renewable generation in an effort to meet corporate sustainability goals. We stand ready to assist our members with that. However, we have also been working very hard over the last 3 years in conjunction with our wholesale power provider, Sunflower Electric, to really develop renewable energy programs that would allow our members to subscribe to large-scale utility projects that provide them all the green attributes as if they owned it themselves, but they also get the economies of scale associated with those large projects. And they don't have the hassle of owning and maintaining a facility. So we see that as a win-win.
Cut you off.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Kimberly Jenker-Savati, Kansas Municipalities.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'll be very brief. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Again, when we think about the municipal utilities, we're thinking about some of our large communities in the state, but we're also thinking about some of our smallest communities in the state. And we formed largely, nearly 100 years ago, largely because it wasn't necessarily profitable to serve our communities. And we are community-based, we're community-focused. So we have a very vested interest in making sure that we're bringing in as much new business as possible, that we're working as closely with those that are in our communities, what if they want to install wind, if they want to install solar. So Kansas Power Pool, KMEA, they are aggressively going out and installing large parking lot arrays of solar panels, other type EV charging stations. They're purchasing renewable energy, all to gain access to more affordable energy for the customer base. We see House Bill 2227 as yet another mandate from the state that would dramatically impact the ability for those 118 communities to do business. We will absolutely, welcome with open arms the opportunity to serve additional load and work with additional customers. But you have to go back to exactly how utilities are operated. And we operate under the RESA statutes, which creates defined service territories and sets specific standards as to how we serve our customers and when, and safety standards. And so if you allow one company to come in and as they are a developer, they are retaining ownership of the tax credits, so then they can transfer the ownership of those tax credits to the market or to sell them on the market. Well, that creates a problem for those of us in the utility industry that are designed to serve that particular community. And with 118 communities, it would make it very difficult for a lot of those communities to continue to try and operate under the RESA statutes, maintaining those reliabilities and safety standards if we have developers coming in and attempting to cherry pick load. So with that, I'll be glad to stand for any questions. We do oppose 2227, and if this bill is worked, we would seek to exempt municipal utilities.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next up is Jeff Martin with Evergy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Evergy strongly opposes this bill because it will hurt residential and smaller commercial customers by allowing the larger customers to avoid paying their fair share of the grid while still being served by it. Such a situation shifts costs to residential and small commercial customers. This is simply, by another name, a mini deregulation bill. The proponents of this legislation are not suggesting that they no longer need access to the electrical grid or the generation that Evergy provides them today. They cannot truthfully say that this will not raise costs on other customers, and they cannot truthfully say that they will need access to the electrical grid less or have a positive cost impact to the grid operations generally. They just want to pay less. Evergy has spent the last several years working to make our rates regionally competitive, as this committee has heard. This action would be in the opposite direction and make rates less competitive, all to give a couple of larger users a financial benefit on the backs of all other customers. The stated goal of the third-party PPAs is to bring renewable resources is unnecessary and duplicative of current programs that we have at Evergy today. First of all, our generation mix is already 50% carbon-free with a goal of net zero by 2045. Additionally, we have programs such as our Renewables Direct that will allow customers to access renewable energy as part of their current energy mix. The thing about that is, since we are the utility, we have the ability to put programs together that do not create subsidies for others. Renewables Direct is one of those. There is no cross subsidies that go to non-participants in that program. They can't say that with this bill. We are confident we can find a solution to work with the military. I'm on an EEI task force. I think you're familiar with the Edison Electric Institute that is looking right now at President Biden's Executive Order 14057, which is the one that Mr. Rasmussen mentioned. The difficulty in that is it continues to move. Not only do they want 100% renewable energy, they want it load matching, which means that on an hourly interval, we have to come up with renewable sources that support them. So when the wind's not blowing, when the solar is not out, we still have to find other sources to match that load on an hourly amount. So thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee, for your time. I'm happy to stand for questions. Thank you.
All right, that concludes the in-person testimonies. Committee, do you have any questions? And just be aware, we are 10 minutes over, so I want to keep it short, but I don't want to cut anybody off. So Representative Proctor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to ask Mr. Martin a question, if I could. You said you were willing to work with the military installations. What would you have in mind? Would it be just doing this for the military installations and not for any other customer, or how would you attack carving out just the military installations?
Yeah, so what we could do is we have the Renewables Direct program right now, where portion of their generation mix could be renewable. Now, unfortunately, that's based on wind primarily right now, and it doesn't always blow. As I mentioned, you have to load match. So what we're doing is we're trying to figure out programs that are like the Renewable Direct that we could extend to the military. In fact, we extended that to the military. However, it was a 20-year agreement, and at the time, they could not sign a contract longer than, I think it was 5 years. And so there's just certain items that we need to work with them to get to that 2030 goal, and we can work with them under the programs that we currently have at Evergy. We just need to expand upon those and then make the criteria such that it meets their needs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Absolutely. Representative Schreiber.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I don't know who would want to address this, but it's the way I read on the PPA's contracts is there's really no oversight or safeguards in there that a PPA that offers it to a set of customers or a customer could give an incentive rate pretty low, bring them in for 2 or 3 months, and then they could raise it like they've done in other deregulated states. Am I thinking of that correctly? That there's really, I mean, it's a contract between two people, but it seems like they can be manufactured well enough that it could be beneficial for the person that's offering the contract to whoever's buying that power.
Well, considering that PPAs are simply a finance option, I mean, there's no reason a bank or a lease company could do the same. So I imagine the same laws would apply, but I don't know.
Okay. Last question, Representative Salinas-Eaton.
I'm new to all this, and I'm very candid about that. A colleague of mine said the other day, I listen to one side and I think, wow, that makes sense. And I listen to the other side, wow, that makes sense. Why on earth do we not have an energy plan in this state that looks to all of the participants in this? I mean, we're down in the weeds. I'd like to see as much renewables used in this state as absolutely possible, and not with all deliberate speed, but let's move on this stuff, but let's have a plan so that everybody can be part of the solution. It feels like we're constantly debating things that, anyway, I'm going to get off my soapbox. I guess my question is, why don't we have one? And why can't we push to finally put one in place? I mean, a state energy plan.
And who is that directed at? A certain person, or?
Yeah,
Yeah, that's an excellent idea. The Clean Energy Business Council has long been advocating for that. There is no question it is even more important today than ever before because of the infrastructure dollars and the IRA. So we stand behind support for an energy plan and would hope all of you would work on that in addition to the policies presented today.
Normally, I'd let you. I need to cut it off. We've got the House floor coming up, so I appreciate everybody being here. And with that, I'm going to close the hearing on 2227. Committee on Thursday, we're going to be hearing on House Bill 2156, 2225, and 2226. Appreciate everybody's time. Thank you.